Colleagues, I think we'll begin. We are small but perfectly formed as a tutorial group now, and I'm reliably informed there are 15 colleagues out there in the ether online for this session as well. I'd like to introduce Lucy Henshall, who you see there. For various reasons, which she will no doubt explain, she is in the ether herself rather than in person. She's going to speak for 15 or 20 minutes, and then the aim is to make this a very interactive session. I may need, if you've got a question to ask, which I'm sure you will have, I may need to move close to you. That's only so that the sound is picked up on my lapel mic here. The people who are out there in the ether will hear Lucy, they will hear you. I'm reliably informed as well, thanks to the wonders of our AV crew at the back. Lucy, the floor is yours. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Having had to write a biog, which I sent in yesterday, I think, rather belatedly, it's now rather delicious to think I can say anything I want to this forum about who I am and what I am, because nobody has anything on paper, and the introduction was my name. And I think that's a really good lead-in to what I'm going to talk to you about this morning. So yes, I am a GP, and I'm of the generation that uses that phrase, I am a GP. And I think there is a contrast with some of our younger GPs coming through the system now who say they work as a GP. So I'll just let that one play in your mind while I'm talking. So I am a GP. In the interest of playing top trumps, I'm going to see if I can top Claire Gerarda's 31 years consecutive consulting in a practice, which I can't, because I only managed 20 years as a partner in my practice before a whole string of events unfolded. But it will be 40 years this coming autumn that I went to medical school. And when that fact dawned on me recently, I thought, God, I'm not old enough to have done anything 40 years ago, which means it was 40 something years ago when my little teenage head thought, I want to be a GP. And here I am. And I guess this session is looking at the lovely pictures I can see on screen and the people in the room, I'm feeling and sensing that the majority of you are in the late career or retired members or have interests in that realm, and that we all share the joys of discovering new hair colour without cost. It's a really interesting invitation to speak this, because why am I any more qualified than anybody else to talk about what next in our careers? And I'm not, I'm just me. So to whistle you through my career, I'm a Sheffield graduate. I did my GP training in Lincolnshire, then did locums for a couple of years, which was incredibly enlightening. While my husband finished his GP training, I worked out exactly what kind of practice I did and didn't want to work in thereafter. And then we moved down to Suffolk in 1993, and we've been here ever since. And it's a little piece of heaven on earth, really. It's an absolutely beautiful place, unless you want to talk politics, which I'm going to try not to do, because it's slightly less Brexit heartlands than Lincolnshire, but not by much. And it's distinctly white Anglo-Saxon, which is very frustrating. But it is a little bit of heaven. And I was a partner in a practice for 20 years, ended up a senior partner a little earlier than I expected, at the same time as we were trying to merge with a neighbouring practice to access funds to build a £6 million build. It was quite a tough time, actually. It was quite busy trying to persuade NHS England to fund us. We've been campaigning for 10 years. And then on a personal level, the whole thing imploded because I ended up having major surgery and a whole load of health stuff and lost my job, and boom, I'm out the other side. And so I believe the reason I'm here, or that I've been invited here, is a combination of both my personal experience, but also my professional experience over the last 6-7 years, where I've spent time in what I nicknamed the gap, the place which is where you go or where you fall into when you leave your practice in an undesigned way and look back in at the profession that you belong to for a couple of decades and maybe the job you've been in for 25 years and think, oh, now what? What the heck next? The return to work journey we could talk about for hours. I've over the last few years set up as a freelance self-employed activity, something that I call Welcome Back to Work, which helps GPs who are still on the performance list return to work in a rather confused and sometimes quite hostile environment with an awful lot of bureaucracy, and Claire alluded to that in her opening address. But increasingly, I'm encountering GPs who are at the tail end of their career and thinking, I think I've done my time. I think I want to do something different. I don't know what I want to do next. And from where I sit, I just find it heartbreaking that as incredibly experienced professionals with decades of expertise, experience, and activity under their belts, that individuals find themselves going, I don't really know what I can do. And my junior partners, they're well, they said I'm not fast enough anymore, and really I need to kind of just roll over and slide into retirement and go and crawl under a rock somewhere because they want me to work twice as fast as I can. And the unkindness, which is, I think, unconscious. I don't think Claire and Margaret both talked about division. I don't think anybody in our profession means to be unkind to anybody else. But I think the biggest unkindness is that GPs experience actually does come from each other. I think we are extraordinarily unkind to each other, given how good we are to our patients. And it's perhaps stemming from that survival strategy that we all have, where you can get through a surgery of 35 patients and then go home and kick the dog. Well, I hope nobody actually kicks the dog. We turn on each other as a coping strategy when the work that we're doing is difficult. So where am I at the moment? I'm not in active clinical practice. I am still on the performers list. I'm very conscious that I am an enigma, and I am an irritation to my local responsible officer, because by the rules, I probably shouldn't still be on the performers list, but I'm terrier determined and tenacious, and I refuse to have my professional status removed from me because I found it difficult to return to clinical practice with chronic migraine completely messing up my abilities and availabilities in the conventional sense. And I work in an area that is quite old-fashioned, and particularly pre-pandemic wouldn't have entertained flexible working in any sense. And I'm damned if I'm going to give up my professional status because some rule book says you haven't done enough work. And I play back into the system, yeah, but I've done a hell of a lot of learning, because when you can't work, you do an awful lot of reading and you do an awful lot of peer discussions. And actually every Wednesday afternoon for 90 minutes, I host a group of GPs who are in work and we talk about what they're doing. So yes, it's not the same as clinical practice, but the vicarious experience is enormous. I have learned more in the last few years than I learned in the last few years when I was clinically active. And I mentioned that really as a sort of lead into what am I going to try and explain to you in this session, and what would I like you to do? I thought very long and hard about how to prepare this session, and then rocked up, as I always do, with no slides, no props, nothing, and not entirely clear where I was going to take you. I think the reference that was made at the opening this morning about the backdrop, the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, the complete mess that our country is in, and these massive existential threats to general practice coming over the hill, that it might all be, disassembled within the decade. It's a really, really difficult backdrop, very bewildering. And if everything familiar that we've known in our careers is about to disappear, it's really hard to plan. It's really hard to make decisions. It's really hard to know whether to cling on and fight for what you believe in, or to sail off into the sunset. And I think sailing is probably a very good retirement activity, though I don't do it myself. And I guess what I'm going to suggest to you today is, even if I burble on and you don't quite know where it's going, listen with your heart, not with your ears, not with your head. And I'm not going to give you hints and tips that you write down and think, first do this and then do that and then do the other. This is, I believe, the time in our career where we're allowed to think differently and actually think about ourselves. And I was reflecting that if I went to medical school 40 years ago, how much career guidance have I had in that 40 years? And I'm honestly saying I cannot remember any. I do remember in my sixth form having a kick up the bum when my physics wasn't going very well. And they said, if you want to get into med school, you need to sort your physics out. And I did manage to. That was sort of targeted careers guidance. But in terms of what direction do you want to go, what kind of a GP do you want to be? My trainers, the two of them, we had a split system when I trained in Lincolnshire, were brilliant. But the NHS system, the NHS England and its predecessor system, did anybody guide any of us where we were going? No, we went where we were told. we did our rotations in GP training. As I say, I spent 2 years looking for a job and actually created a partnership role. I was very lucky. I did a locum for 3 months in the practice that I then became a partner in, and they approached me afterwards to say, we'd like to expand, would you like to join us? And I've been told recently that I'm a positive disruptor or a thought leader. I thought, no, I'm not. I just kind of know what I like and know what I don't. So when they said, would you like to join us? I said, yeah, but my husband's doing a 1 in 2. His family's in Canada, mine's in Ireland. We're in Suffolk. So I'd like to do 4 sessions, please. No on call and no out of hours, because it was back in the day. It was 93. And they went, okay, that's fine. And we thrashed out what we believed the not on call bit was worth. And it was a decade later when the out of hours, was removed from us. And it was a really interesting comparison then. We had undervalued them. So I know the government undervalued it, but my partnership and I, we had also undervalued it. And I got a massive pay rise in 2004 when they realized that I'd been a bit hard done by financially compared to my partners doing on call. But I'd been happy with it and they'd been happy with it. And juggling with children, 3 children under 5, all of that, and a bigger partner, it worked. And it worked because I felt it worked and they felt it worked. So what relevance has that got to this stage of our careers? I think we are brainwashed throughout our career to do what the system wants us to do, which is more of everything, faster, for more people, with less resources. And as one of my partners said to me many years ago, eventually the entire NHS will run on goodwill. There'll be no resources, there'll be more patients than you can see, and it'll be run completely on nothing. I was like, what do you mean? He said, well, that's the direction of travel, more for less. So at this point in our careers, we can sit back and think, well, who am I? What do I want to do? And Claire alluded to the sort of backstabbing and nastiness that goes on in our profession, and it goes on. And I suspect if I was to ask each of you privately, has anybody had a pop at you because you're a late career GP and you've dropped your sessions, or you've left a partnership and become a locum, and they say, oh, it's all right for you, it's all right for you having a quiet number, I'm stuck here at work. There is an unsavory combination of envy and jealousy that swirls around that doesn't have words, and I would like us to all use words to describe it and name it and get past it, work through it. Because if you've done 3 decades of general practice, you owe nobody anything. And I don't care what Sajid Javid says, you don't owe anybody anything. You have done an extraordinary career. And perhaps the thing to do at this point is to celebrate yourself. So when I say listen with your heart, I'd like you to, after today, to go away and write the CV you would send your grandmother, not the CV you send to a job application, but the one that says, this is who I am, and this is what I've achieved, and this is what I love doing. And along the way, I learned that about myself, and then I became this kind of a doctor, because we don't pause and think about our strengths ever. We get beaten about the head on an annual basis about our weaknesses. Good appraisers obviously do celebrate our successes, but we still are told, you're a bit rusty on the old renal medicine, Lucy. Well, I've been rusty on the renal medicine since I first did it as an undergraduate. I hate kidneys and I avoid them like the plague. But I'm damn good at mental health and I'm damn good at other things. And at this point in my career, one of my other activities is clinical lead and practitioner health. At this point in my career, I don't want to do the things that I'm not good at. And so my biggest suggestion, boldest suggestion to you is, don't look at what jobs are out there. Don't look at what people are saying you ought to be doing. And to turn it into a positive, try and imagine what you do want to do. So write your CV. Ask yourself, what do I really love doing? What really floats my boat? Oh, I'm just looking at the online people because I can see them better than the people in the room. But is anybody in the room familiar with the Japanese concept of ikigai? Good. A nice combination of nods and confusion. So the high-tech version of Lucy speaking online, this is the slide. Can you see this slide?
Yes.
It works really well, doesn't it? So The Japanese concept of ikigai, and I'll hold that there so if anybody wants to screenshot, they can have a picture of that rather than my mug. This is the stage in your career. It's sad that we didn't get told this at the beginning of our career, but at this stage in your career, and I can put that up again later, try and find your ikigai. It's the thing that you get up for in the morning. What really inspires you? Because if you can find activity, be it professional, creative, being a grandparent, if you do the thing you love, you will do it brilliantly. And if you push yourself to do things you don't want to do anymore or things you don't like, you will struggle. And I think we're not encouraged to do this through our careers, but if ever there's a time to take, oh God, I nearly said take back control when I was avoiding politics, to own where you are at in your career journey, it's now, is ask yourself bold questions. What do I want to do that I never got the chance to do? And in that ikigai diagram, ask yourself why you want to do it. Because if you can understand your own values, what drives you in your work and in your activity, you'll find things to do. So what do I mean by your values? I use some career cards with the GPs I work with in Welcome Back. And we have 4 sections. Things that are very important in the career, quite important, not important, and the interesting one, really important that these are not present in the work I do. And the cards list all the sort of things you can think of, you know, relationships with patients, money, power, influence, flexible working hours, you know, anything you can think of. Actually, what the different things are, you can invent yourself. Try to work out what you really do want to be doing isn't easy unless you ask yourself, why do I want to do it? So that comes back to those sort of Simon Sinek questions. Why do I do what I do? How do I want to do what I do? And when you can work those things out, you can go and find the what it is. And you're probably all sitting there thinking, I don't know what she's talking about now. But out there are all the GPs in the practices that are flogging themselves to death and are too busy. And they're putting out ads all the time saying, I need another slave to do 40 patients a morning without a coffee break. I love the advertisements on our local locum bank that proudly tell you that there's a 1-hour unpaid break. And why do we treat each other in this way? That, you know, we want you to come and work for 12 hours, but we're not going to pay you to take a lunch break because you don't have any worth. That wouldn't entice me to that practice. A half day, including half an hour with the partners in the common room afterwards as a paid part of the work would. So I don't believe at this stage in our career that we should be looking at anybody else's advertised jobs. I think this is the time to actually create jobs. And it's what I'm encouraging GPs in Suffolk, well, Suffolk and Hertfordshire, Essex, have quite a wide geography, to do now is play back into the system what you can offer. Play to your strengths. Can you hear me okay now? Yeah. Yeah, play to your strengths. What bit of clinical medicine really excites you? One of my colleagues locally retired from partnership and then marketed himself locally as the locum who deals with the long-standing conundrum, resident still at home rather than in a home, polypharmacy, multimorbidity, elderly population. He just loves unpicking muddles. As you can imagine, he's never short of work because he comes in and he might only see 8 or 10 patients, but he sorts stuff out and he puts 35 years of general practice experience into that. And he's absolutely fabulous and he's really happy in his work. How do you market yourself? I mean, even this event, networking, absolutely networking. Find other people and talk to them about the things that, you know, just tickling away in your head going, I'd really love to run a volunteer group for the lonely people in the practice, for the people on long-term mental health, sickness, absence, who aren't at work, who don't have any friends. And I'd like to run a dog walking business. Find people who want to do things. Talk to them. Go talk to your local practice and say, do you have lots of patients that you think their prime problem is loneliness? Well, here's an idea. Not everything needs to cost money. And this comes back to the values piece. Why do you want to work? Is it that you want to work to earn because you're supporting children, grandchildren, university fees or whatever? Or is it a bit of a gut reaction to the loss of professional status, that you're not quite ready to just be an old person, and so being a doctor is something recognisable? I would encourage you to ask yourself why you need to have a title. Actually, if you sit in your garden painting all day, it's a valid way of being. So be proud of your own personal interests and aspirations. But in that back to that ikigai piece, you'll see that identifying in amongst what you're good at, what you love doing, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for is potentially the sweet spot in the middle. But there are other alternative sweet spots. Looking at Ukraine at the moment, you might be somebody who actually sits up here, who can see a need, and you would love to run a relocation or educational provision for incoming Ukrainian refugee families. You don't care if you don't get paid, you've done your earning. You might be in this camp. Or down here, the more traditional, what the world needs, you can get paid for it, being a GP. What you can be paid for, what the world needs, what's your mix of these things? I'm conscious that the time is going to roll past, and I guess what I'm trying to do is encourage you to think, what do I want to do? And then work out how to present it to the them. And I deliberately have left the thorny bit of performers list and the being allowed to the end, because that's where we all stumble. We start off with, oh, if I don't do, if it boils my blood, I hear this phrase, if I don't do my 40 sessions that I've been told I have to do, then I won't be allowed to do anything. It's absolute balderdash, because it doesn't have to be 40 sessions. You can complete a structured review template and evidence that you are fit for purpose working less than 40 sessions. It's not easy, but it's possible. But more importantly, who are they to say you can't do this? So if you've got an idea that you want to work with maybe your own practice, or perhaps the practice you live closest to, because I think changing your role in the practice you've always worked in is notoriously difficult. Going to a neighbouring practice and saying, what are you guys struggling with at the moment? Is there something, in the practice? What about mentoring your ARRS crew? Do you need somebody in to do debrief? Because I love teaching, and if I could come and work with you for a few hours, maybe just end of the morning session, I'd love to do that. Find these creative conversations and be more confident in exploring what you think you can offer, because there is more work out there than anybody can get done, and you don't have to do the bit other people tell you to do. You need to do the bit that works for you. So I'm going to shut up now, because I do ramble. I like to tease people's minds into thinking, and your hearts into thinking, okay, so this stage of my career is about me. And I would like to ask or invite you to ask me some questions, or to just share some reflections on what it is that you find challenging at this point. Why is being at this tipping point, this transition in our career, so complicated? And how can we help each other through it? And I do believe it's by dialogue. A lot of it is by dialogue, finding our tribe and understanding ourselves. So over to the room, the virtual room and the other room, and we've got about 15 minutes. I have absolutely no idea how virtual Q&A works when I'm in leafy Suffolk. Half of you are scattered around the country and some of you are in the room, but you know what? We've learned a lot this last couple of years. We can all make stuff work now. So who's got any comments or questions they'd like to ask? You can be as specific as you want about how do I actually do something, or shoot me out of the sky and tell me that I'm talking balderdash and that actually what you have to do is work until you're dead. My passing thought, my first trainer in general practice was a wise man, sadly no longer with us, but he said to me, general practice will suck you till you're dry. It said it's a fantastic career, but it will exhaust you. And this was 1990-ish. The new contract was just coming. He said it will drain you. I said statistically, if you work till you're 68, if you work till you're 65 and retire, you'll probably die at 68. And if you work until you're 68 you'll die at 68. So just bear that in mind towards the end of your career, that if you want to have a good retirement, make sure you make space for it and plan it. And yeah, for those of you sitting there thinking, I just want to stop and retire and run a chicken farm, do it. It's your life, no one else's. So, over to the room.
Thank you, Lucy. I've got a year to go then, because I'm 67. I will probably drop dead next year. So I will see the people in the room and will invite questions. How will the people out there appear? Okay, shall we ask the people out in the wider world first, perhaps out of courtesy? Any questions or comments as Lucy has invited you to contribute on our Zoom audience?
Rebecca.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for that. That's interesting. I suppose I just want to make a couple of comments on one of the things that you said that really upset me was how your experience of other GPs being unkind. I've had it's 30 years since I qualified, but the first 10 years I spent doing adult medicine, did my MRCP, and then I went off to New Zealand, did some work out there for a couple of years and switched to pediatrics, came back, did peds for quite a while, and then my husband decided to be a GP in the Highlands. So we relocated and I had to retrain then for the third time and do general practice. But that was fine in the end, because we had 2 babies, and I had been working for the first few years, like a 1 in 2, 120-hour week, as you did back in the early 90s. And then for the first time, I actually went to part-time. I was able to get into a training practice where I was allowed to do it part-time, because I had a few-month-old baby and a 2-year-old, and did all my MRCGP stuff and did it over 2 years, because at the time most GP registrars were training for 1 year full-time, and obviously I couldn't really manage that. And being out in remote and rural, we did a lot more, and at that point we were still doing our own on-call, and we had a wee hospital to manage, which I loved, because I loved my hospital medicine and I missed that, so I was very happy. But also we ended up doing lots and lots of pre-hospital training, because it's 120 miles to the nearest main facilities. So because it was so remote, I'm in a salaried practice and joined, but it's essentially run single-handed. So there's only 2 of us and we job share. So then for the last 19 years, I've been working less than full-time. I don't know what the current thing is, but we had a brilliant relationship with the local consultants up in the main centres, who would come to Skye to do their stuff. And I ran a Canadian thing that came to Scotland called practice-based small group learning, PBSGL. I don't know if people down in England hear of it. But it was really good, because all the practices are really remote. It's a 50-mile round trip just to go to the co-op. And so my experience has not been that GPs are horrible to each other. Actually, there's been a really, really good support. And also, I think partly because it's remote and rural, the way that general practice is run in Highland, we for decades have been doing 15-minute appointments. So if you have a complicated patient, then you want a double, and spend obviously a lot of the mental health, but also, as you mentioned, you've got a colleague doing these kind of like complicated things where there's multiple morbidity. I love that, because I love doing the medical side. As you say, unpicking all these complicated things, and we try and keep up, because for a patient to go to outpatients, it's a 6-hour round trip, so obviously we need to keep them in. And a few months ago, I joined a GP midlife kind of thing, run through the RCGP, and it was a group of GPs from Nottinghamshire, and we had breakout rooms, and the lady I spoke to, she said, "Our patients hate us," and I was like, "What? Our patients love us." And I just thought, what's going on? And actually, for me, and you talk about burnout, I haven't got burnout, but I've actually taken a year sabbatical, because the thing that I really, really, really wanted to do all my life was the tropical medicine diploma, which is what I'm currently doing. I'm down in Liverpool. I've left Scotland to spend a year. I'm going to go and do some hopefully some medical volunteering for NGOs for the next few months. And I have to decide whether I really want to go back to the practice that I'm in. It's as I say, it's a salary practice, and there's all sorts of things. And it's not that I feel like I'm burnt out with my practice and my GP partner, but I feel like I'm 30 years down the line and I actually want to do more. I feel like I've got more to give, but I suppose I'm just telling this story because there are lots of, my experience has been very positive. My GP partner, unfortunately, she struggles and she finds it very tough, and she does have burnout, and she's actually planning to retire at 55, which I feel is very sad because she's a good doctor, but she doesn't enjoy the job. I love the job. So it's just, I suppose all I'm trying to say is, Claire was talking about the system, and I mean, my family's all down in England, excuse me, and I'm considering doing some locum in GP in England, but the system down here just seems crazy. I couldn't even get an appointment to see a GP down here because I had a problem with my asthma and I needed some extra medication. I had to obviously call my own GP and they get them to send the drugs down. But, you know, I just thought, I don't understand. The system we've got up in Scotland seems to me to work. And why are we not doing it elsewhere in the UK? But anyway, it was just a wee story just to say it's not all bad. And actually, you know, taking a year out to do something that you want to do, you know, is a good thing.
Absolutely. I have a dear friend locally who's retired from his partnership and is doing the GP work up in Hoy, who absolutely loves it. I think, you know, remote and Scottish general practice is perhaps the thing we've lost. I have one of my, the four of us who trained together in a VTS, she's practicing in Scotland, and it sounds very, very different. There is something wonky going on in England. I think perhaps just to clarify what I was saying about unkindness, I think to be very specific, the area I observe the unkindness, and this is where I'm supporting a number of GPs, is GPs with their own long-term conditions or specifically disabilities, many of which are acquired in adulthood. Given that 20% of the adult population has a disability, it shouldn't surprise anybody that we get them too. One of the GPs that I'm supporting at the moment had a stroke. He was a senior partner, he had a stroke when he was 50 and has residual left arm weakness. And he has been on a very complicated journey the last couple of years, and actually said in a group setting the other day, when I was recruiting as a young partner, I thought partly, and he was very honest, he said, I thought part-time people were flaky, I thought women couldn't hack it because of their kids. And he said this to a group of predominantly young female GPs. I thought the only way you could do general practice was full-time, full pelt as a partner. He said, and I'm now 53 and I'm trying to find something in the NHS that will let me work. And all I get told is we can't really accommodate you because you're a bit disabled. He even went through the training for a job with a local university when he said, is my left arm an issue? No. So he spent weeks doing training, and then they said, actually, we've decided it is. So I think that's where we're unkind to each other. It's okay for our patients to have illnesses, but we're not very tolerant of each other. And that plays out into how we treat ourselves as well. We feel guilty if we if we require reasonable accommodation, you know, and things like that in the workplace. And I think it's an uncomfortable reality. It's perhaps the last taboo. We're getting past some of the other issues of, you know, mental health and other stigmas, but I think disability is still a blind spot within our profession, and it's wasting really good people who have a lot to offer but can't do everything. And that's where our performers list appraisal system, I think, falls short. It doesn't celebrate. We rarely get asked the question, what can you do? What would you like to do? And how can we support you to do it? We get
tell him to come to Scotland then.
Yeah. Who else would like?
Shall we take a question from the room and alternate perhaps?
Please.
Anybody in the room want to raise a comment or a question of Lucy? Okay, maybe in a few minutes. I did see Jude raised her hand on Zoom. So maybe Jude wants to come in.
Hi, I'm up here in Yorkshire. I was going to be joining you in the room today, but for COVID reasons wasn't able to. So many things from Lucy's presentation that I would like to pick up on, but I think the real value of this session will be if we can hear from lots of people about your own journeys and what point you're at and what choices you've already made or are thinking of making. So I thought I would just pick up on one thing, which is what you said about retaining your license. Should we retain our license? When do we press that button? How complicated is it? How difficult is it to come back again once you've done it? Do we know? Do we care? And where are you at with that? So for me, I qualified in 1981, so I'm beating Lucy on the number of years. I was 27 years in the same practice, and then for various reasons, partly to do with unkindness that has been touched on, partly to do with personal ill health, I retired from my practice, took my pension at age 57. I wasn't ready to stop being a GP, so I continued. I came back after about a year out. I came back into the workforce as a locum GP, but marketed myself very specifically as a locum trainer. So I covered for various of my GP colleagues who were taking sabbaticals or on maternity leave or on long-term sick leave. And I changed my area. So I moved from one city to another across Yorkshire in order to avoid the difficulties of changing roles within one's practice area. But now, having worked up until in that capacity up until the pandemic, I then thought that because I'm not as young as I used to be, I didn't feel that I could do face-to-face during the pandemic, so I worked for NHS 111 and found that really very challenging, but also very I learned so much, and fantastic peer group amongst the GPs who were doing that job. When that NHS 111 service folded up last summer, I thought, right, now really probably is the time for me to give up my license. Should I do it? Found I couldn't do it. Are they going to recall us for the next wave? I felt that really strong urge to still be match fit and fit to practice. And my appraiser, bless him, he said, well, you could, you need to think about this, and next year, are there other things that you want to do in your life? Which of course there are lots of other things that I both am doing and want more time to do. So as time has gone on in the last 6 months, I got to the stage very recently when I thought, okay, do I really need to plan my timing of pressing that button to relinquish my license? As my appraiser put it, do I need to exit stage left chased by bears, or should I just do it? So I did it. 2 weeks ago, I pressed the button, and I am now a retired GP. So I'd like to hear other people's journeys, where you're at, how you found about that journey. And one of the things that encouraged me to do it, even though I have been a GP appraiser right since the beginning, I still find it complex to really understand what the journey would be to come back if you change your mind. And actually, it's simpler than you probably think.
Do you want to comment on that, Lucy? We have 3 or 4 minutes left.
Okay.
So maybe time for one more contribution.
I think it's, to pick up what you said, Jude, it's simpler than you think, but it's more complicated than it needs to be, is my summary. And so if you're undecided, tick along rather than give it up. And that particularly applies to the performers list in England at the moment. I think that there's a bit of a mess there that's getting sorted, but not fast enough. Brenda, there's a hand I see.
A quick comment. I gave mine up when I retired at 60. At the time, I was I felt I'd done enough. I was ready to leave. I had plans to travel. Retired at the end of May 2019, and then of course within the year COVID came, so that curtailed the traveling. Towards the end of 2020, unfortunately, I developed a serious illness, and I'm now immunocompromised. So that really limits what I can get out and do. And it's really, I haven't really got to the stage of rethinking my retirement. I'm sort of going day to day and shielding and all the rest of it. But I had given up my registration, and I got it back during the pandemic on the emergency registration scheme. And as far as I'm aware, I still have it, because I had an email saying, do you want to keep this? and I didn't reply, which meant that I think I'm still registered. But there is very little that I can do. I can't do anything face to face. And I think I'm really a bit at sea as how to, I'm only 62, as how to approach the rest of my retirement, because I've now got this immunosuppression, and it's really altered my plans.
Really compromising. Yeah, my husband's shielded as a GP. I hear you.
Lucy, do you want to just draw the session to a close with any final remarks, perhaps?
I'm very conscious that in 40 minutes or whatever we've had, that we've only scratched the surface, and I'd love to have been able to be in the room myself. And it was, again, COVID reasons, partly my husband's vulnerability and other reasons that I wasn't with you all. I would love conversation to be sparked. So if those of you physically in the room go out muttering to each other, that's fantastic. And more than happy if anybody, I'll put my email in the chat box, if anybody wants to connect or be connected. I think, you know, LCARM groups are springing up all over the place, but actually just chewing the cud, going for a walk with somebody who's got the same dilemmas and playing with ideas is massively helpful. There's a huge volume of experience and ideas and confidence building support in this room. And I suppose at the beginning when I said, you know, value yourself, we take a lot of bashing as a profession. And I think you should all be incredibly proud of what you've already done and step forward into the next phase, looking for the things that bring you joy, be it work or retirement. You know, literally seek out things that make you happy.
Well, on that inspiring note, can I thank you very much on behalf of the conference. You will hear real applause in a minute. I don't know whether you will hear virtual applause from colleagues who are out there.
Oh, thank you.